Hello. Hello, hello, hello. How are you? I hope you had a good Monday afternoon and evening wherever it is you are. We here in Massachusetts had a little bit of snow actually and a little bit of rain, which is some of the first snow and rain we've had in a long while. And it was nice. It was nice to have it. And it's a nice night to be reading some stories. I have my lefty mug here, which has got the little hole on the wrong side, so you can't drink with your right hand, which I love drinking out of. This is my favorite mug, and it's nice to have it here as part of tonight's broadcast. We're going with the Aurora Bedtime Story Project, Night 2. And before before we do the stories, I just wanted to talk about a few things. First of all, I wanted to say a couple of hellos. One of which was to Aurora, who is listening along with her mother Hannah right now, and shares her name with the project, which I think is lovely. Hello, Aurora. Hope you're doing okay and enjoying the evening. And I also wanted to say hello to Peter, whose father Will suggested some of the stories that we're going to be listening to and reading tonight, or that I'm going to be reading tonight. But before we get to any of it, one of my favorite readers and actors who does this kind of thing is LeVar Burton. LeVar Burton used to do the Reading Rainbow, and now he has a podcast which he calls LeVar Burton Reads. And one of my favorite things about it is before they get into the stories, what he does is everyone sits together and we just take a deep breath together. And I think that's a great way to get started. So I think we should do that now. What do you think? Okay, let's do a deep breath on 3. We'll inhale, okay? 1, 2, 3. And exhale. Doesn't that feel better? I think so. Okay, we're going to have a couple of stories. Yesterday we had the first 2 chapters of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and we're going to have the next 2 chapters this evening. But first, we're going to have the stories that were suggested by Will and his son, Peter. And they are the Old Mother West Wind stories. These are by Thornton Burgess, and I think they're really fantastic, and I hope you enjoy them as well. So we're going to get right to this little story. Settle into whatever nook it is that you have. I'm settling into this big, wonderful leather chair, and let's get to some story times. Okay. Chapter 1 of Old Mother West Wind by Thornton Burgess. Old Mother West Wind came down from the purple hills in the golden light of the early morning. Over her shoulders was slung a bag, a great big bag, and in the bag were all of Old Mother West Wind's children, the merry little breezes. Old Mother West Wind came down from the purple hills to the green meadows, and as she walked, she crooned a song. Ships upon the ocean wait, I must hurry on, I must hurry on. Mills are idle if I'm late, I must hurry on, I must hurry on. When she reached the green meadows, Old Mother West Wind opened her bag, turned it upside down, and shook it. Out tumbled all the merry little breezes, and began to spin round and round for very joy. For you see, they were to lay in the green meadows all day long, until Old Mother West Wind should come back at night and take them all to their home behind the purple winds. First, they raced over to see Johnny Woodchuck. They found Johnny Chuck sitting just outside his door, eating his breakfast. One, for very mischief, snatched right out of Johnny Chuck's mouth the green leaf of corn he was eating and ran away with it. Another playfully pulled his whiskers, while a third rumpled up his hair. Johnny Chuck pretended to be very cross indeed, but really he didn't mind a bit, for Johnny Chuck loved the Merry Little Breezes and played with them every day. And if they teased Johnny Chuck, they were good to him too. When they saw Farmer Brown coming across the Green Meadows with a gun, one of them would dance over to Johnny Chuck and whisper to him that Farmer Brown was coming, and then Johnny Chuck would hide away, deep down in his snug little house underground, and Farmer Brown would wonder and wonder why it was that he never could get near Johnny Chuck. But he never could. When the Merry Little Breezes left Johnny Chuck, they raced across the Green Meadows to the Smiling Pool to say good morning to Grandfather Frog, who sat on a big lily pad watching for green flies for breakfast. "Chirrup," said Grandfather Frog, which was his way of saying good morning. Just then along came a fat green fly, and up jumped Grandfather Frog. When he sat down again on the lily pad, the fat green fly was nowhere to be seen, but Grandfather Frog looked very satisfied indeed, as he contentedly rubbed his white waistcoat with one hand. "What is the news, Grandfather Frog?" cried the Merry Little Breezes. "Mrs. Redwing has a new speckled egg in her nest in the bulrushes," said Grandfather Frog. "We must see it," cried the Merry Little Breezes, and away they all ran to the swamp where the bulrushes grow. Now someone else had heard of Mrs. Redwing's dear little nest in the bulrushes, and he had started out bright and early that morning to try and find it, for he wanted to steal the little speckled eggs just because they were pretty. It was Tommy Brown, the farmer's boy. When the Merry Little Breezes reached the swamp where the bulrushes grow, they found poor Mrs. Redwing in great distress. She was afraid that Tommy Brown would find her dear little nest, for she was very near it, and his eyes were very sharp. "Oh," cried the Merry Little Breezes, "we must help Mrs. Redwing save her pretty speckled eggs from bad Tommy Brown." So one of the Merry Little Breezes whisked Tommy Brown's old straw hat off his head over into the Green Meadows. Of course, Tommy ran after it. Just as he stooped to pick it up, another little breeze ran away with it. Then they took turns, first one little breeze, then another little breeze, running away with the old straw hat just as Tommy Brown would almost get his hands on it. Down past the Smiling Pool and across the Laughing Brook they raced and chased the old straw hat, Tommy Brown running after it, very cross, very red in the face, and breathing very hard. Way across the Green Meadows they ran to the edge of the wood, where they hung the old straw hat in the middle of a thorn tree. By the time Tommy Brown had it once more on his head, he had forgotten all about Mrs. Redwing and her dear little nest. Besides, he heard the breakfast horn blowing just then, so off he started from home up the Lone Little Path through the wood. And all the Merry Little Breezes danced away across the Green Meadows to the swamp where the bulrushes grow, to see the new speckled egg in the dear little nest where Mrs. Redwing was singing for joy. And while she sang, the Merry Little Breezes danced among the bulrushes, for they knew, and Mrs. Redwing knew, that some day out of that pretty new speckled egg would come a wee baby Redwing. Chapter 2. Why Grandfather Frog Has No Tail. Old Mother West Wind had gone for her day's work, leaving all the Merry Little Breezes to play in the Green Meadows. They had played tag and run races with the bees and played hide-and-seek with the sunbeams, and now they had gathered round the smiling pool where on a green lily pad sat Grandfather Frog. Grandfather Frog was old, very old indeed, and very, very wise. He wore a green coat, and his voice was very deep. When Grandfather Frog spoke, everybody listened very respectfully. Even Billy Mink treated Grandfather Frog with respect, for Billy Mink's father and his father's father could not remember when Grandfather Frog had not sat on the lily pad watching for green flies. Down the smiling pool where some of Grandfather Frog's great-great-great-grandchildren. You wouldn't have known that they were his grandchildren unless someone told you. They didn't look the least bit like Grandfather Frog. They were round and fat and had long tails, and perhaps this is why they were called pollywogs. "Oh, Grandfather Frog, tell us why you don't have a tail as you did when you were young," begged one of the Merry Little Breezes. Grandfather Frog snapped up a foolish green fly and settled himself on his big lily pad, while all the Merry Little Breezes gathered round to listen. "Once upon a time," began Grandfather Frog, "the frogs ruled the world, which was mostly water. There was very little dry land, oh, very little indeed. There were no boys to throw stones, and no hungry mink to gobble up foolish frog babies who were taking a sun bath." Billy Mink, who had joined the Merry Little Breezes and was listening, squirmed uneasily and looked away guiltily. "In those days all the frogs had tails, long, handsome tails, of which they were very, very proud indeed," continued Grandfather Frog. "The king of all the frogs was twice as big as any other frog, and his tail was 3 times as long. He was very proud, oh, very proud indeed of his long tail. He used to sit and admire it until he thought there were never had been, never could be another tail such as his. He used to wave it back and forth in the water, and every time he waved it all the other frogs would cry, 'Ah!' and 'Oh!' Every day the king grew more vain. He did nothing at all but eat and sleep and admire his tail. Now all the other frogs did just as the king did, so pretty soon none of the frogs were doing anything but sitting and eating, sleeping, and admiring their own tails and the king's. Now you all know that people who do nothing worthwhile in this world are of no use, and there is little room for them. So when Mother Nature saw how useless had become the frog tribe, she called the king frog before her, and she said, 'Because you can think of nothing but your beautiful tail, it shall be taken away from you. Because you do nothing but eat and sleep, your mouth shall become wide like a door, and your eyes shall start forth from your head. You shall become bow-legged and ugly to look at, and all the world shall laugh at you.' The king frog looked at his beautiful tail, and already it had become shorter. He looked again, and it was shorter still. Every time he looked at his tail, it had grown shorter and smaller. By and by, when he looked, there was nothing left but a little stub, which he couldn't even wriggle. And even that disappeared as his eyes popped out of his head and his mouth grew bigger and bigger. Old Grandfather Frog stopped and looked sadly at a foolish green fly coming his way. "Drop!" the Grandfather Frog said, opening his mouth very wide and hopping up in the air. When he sat down again on his big lily pad, The green fly was nowhere to be seen. Grandfather Frog smacked his lips and continued. And from that day to this very day, every frog has started life with a big tail and has grown bigger and bigger, and as he does, his tail has grown smaller and smaller, until finally it disappears, and then he remembers how foolish and useless it is to be vain of what nature has given us. And that is how I came to lose my tail, finished Grandfather Frog. Thank you, shouted all the Merry Little Breezes. We won't forget. Then they ran a race to see who could reach Johnny Chuck's home first and tell him that Father Brown was coming down the Green Meadows. What do you think? Shall we have one more of these tales of the old Mother West Wind? I think they're kind of fun. I don't know if you can tell, but it's raining, and the rain is coming down on the roof, and it's very, very relaxing and lovely here. Thank you so much for listening and joining me this evening. I hope you're doing okay. Okay, I think we'll do one more chapter, and then we'll get to some more of Alice's adventures in Wonderland. How about that? Here is Chapter 3, How Reddy Fox Was Surprised. Johnny Chuck and Reddy Fox lived very near together on the edge of the Green Meadows. Johnny Chuck was fat and roly-poly. Reddy Fox was slim and wore a pretty bright red coat. Reddy Fox used to like to frighten Johnny Chuck by suddenly popping out from behind a tree and making believe that he was going to eat Johnny Chuck all up. One bright summer day, Johnny Chuck was out looking for a good breakfast of nice tender clover. He had wandered quite a long way from his snug little house in the long, mellow grass, although his mother had told him never to go out of sight of the door. But Johnny was like some little boys I know, and forgot all he had been told. He walked and walked and walked. Every few minutes Johnny Chuck saw something farther on that looked like a patch of nice fresh clover. And every time when he reached it, Johnny Chuck found that he had made a mistake. So Johnny Chuck walked and walked and walked. Old Mother West Wind, coming across the Green Meadows, saw Johnny Chuck and asked him where he was going. Johnny Chuck pretended not to hear and just walked faster. One of the Merry Little Breezes danced along in front of him. "Look out, Johnny Chuck! You will get lost," cried the Merry Little Breezes, then pulled Johnny's whiskers and ran away. Higher and higher up in the sky climbed round Mr. Red Sun. Every time Johnny Chuck looked up at him, Mr. Sun winked. So long as I can see great, round, red Mr. Sun, and he winks at me, I can't be lost, thought Johnny Chuck, and trotted on, looking for clover. By and by, Johnny Chuck really did find some clover, just the sweetest clover that grew in the Green Meadows. Johnny Chuck ate and ate and ate, and then what do you think he did? Why, he curled up right in the nice, sweet clover and went fast asleep. Great, round, red Mr. Sun kept climbing higher and higher up in the sky. Then, by and by, he began to go down on the other side, and long shadows began to creep out across the Green Meadows. Johnny Chuck didn't know anything about them. He was fast asleep. By and by, one of the Merry Little Breezes found Johnny Chuck all curled up in a funny round ball. "Wake up, Johnny Chuck, wake up!" shouted the Merry Little Breeze. Johnny Chuck opened his eyes. Then he sat up and rubbed them. For just a few minutes he couldn't remember where he was at all. By and by, he sat up very straight and looked over the grass, and to see where he was. But he was so far from home that he didn't see a single thing that looked at all like the things he was used to. The trees were all different. The bushes were all different. Johnny Chuck was lost. Now, when Johnny sat up, Reddy Fox happened to be looking over the Green Meadows, and he saw Johnny's head where it popped over the grass. "Aha!" said Reddy Fox. "I'll scare Johnny Chuck so he'll wish he never put his nose out of his house." Then Reddy dropped down behind the long grass and crept softly, oh, ever so softly, through the paths of his own until he was right behind Johnny Chuck. Johnny Chuck had been so intent looking for home that he didn't see anything else. Reddy Fox stole right up behind Johnny and pulled Johnny's little short tail hard. How it did frighten Johnny Chuck. He jumped right straight up in the air, and when he came down, he was the maddest little woodchuck that ever lived in the Green Meadows. Reddy Fox had thought that Johnny would run, and then Reddy meant to run after him and pull his tail and tease him all the way home. Now Reddy Fox got as big a surprise as Johnny had had when Reddy pulled his tail. Johnny didn't stop to think that Reddy Fox was twice as big as he, but with his eyes snapping and chattering as only a little Chuck can chatter, with every little hair on his little body standing right up on end so that he seemed twice as big as he really was, he started for Reddy Fox. It surprised Reddy Fox so that he didn't know what to do, and he simply ran. Johnny Chuck ran after him, nipping Reddy's heels every minute or two. Peter Rabbit just to be down that way. He was sitting up very straight, looking to see what mischief he could get into when he caught sight of Reddy Fox running as hard as ever he could. "It must be that Bowser, the hound, is after Reddy Fox," said Peter Rabbit to himself. "I must watch out that he doesn't find me." Just then he caught sight of Johnny Chuck, with every little hair standing up on end and running after Reddy Fox as fast as his short legs could go. "Ho, ho, ho!" shouted Peter Rabbit. "Reddy Fox, afraid of Johnny Woodchuck!" "Ha, ha, ha, ha!" Then Peter Rabbit scampered away to find Jimmy Skunk and Bobby Coon and Happy Jack Squirrel to tell them all about how Reddy Fox had run away from Johnny Chuck, for you see they were all a little afraid of Reddy Fox. Straight home ran Reddy Fox as fast as he could go, and going home he passed the house of Johnny Chuck. Now Johnny couldn't run as fast as Reddy Fox, and he was puffing and blowing as only a fat little woodchuck can puff and blow when he has to run hard. Moreover, he had lost his ill temper, and now he thought it was the best joke ever to think that he had actually frightened Reddy Fox. When he came to his own house, he stopped and sat on his hind legs once more. Then he shrilled out after Reddy Fox, "Reddy Fox, a scaredy cat! Reddy Fox, a scaredy cat!" And all the merry little breezes and old Mother West Wind who were playing on the Green Meadows shouted, "Reddy Fox, a scaredy cat! Reddy Fox, a scaredy cat!" And this is the way that Reddy Fox was surprised, and that Johnny Chuck found his way home. There we go. The end of chapter 3. I think those are fun. I think we're going to do some more of those tomorrow. I hope you like them. By the way, if you would like me to say a little hello in these stories, or maybe a little birthday wish if you have a birthday coming up or that kind of thing, just leave a comment in the video here below, and I would happily send a little happy birthday, a little hello, and yeah, just do want to say thank you. Thank you very much for listening. So last night we started with the first couple of chapters of Alice in Wonderland, and the first chapters included Alice following a little white rabbit down the rabbit hole, and then coming to a room where it had this bottle that said "drink me," and she grew very, very, very small. And then it had this cake that said, "Eat me," and she grew very, very, very large. And when she was very large, she began to cry. And as she cried huge tears, and gallons and gallons and gallons of water ended up flowing into this little room that she was in. And as she cried, all these birds and fish and all kinds of other things began to come into the little room and join her, paddling around in the water as she grew smaller and smaller. And so that is exactly where we find Alice now, is in the pool with all these birds and other creatures. And I think that's where we'll continue. I'm going to have a little sip of water here from my lefty mug. Okay. Let's do this. Shall we take another deep breath? I think we should take another deep breath. Ready? Inhale. And exhale. That's nice. Okay. Chapter 3 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 3, A Caucus Race and a Long Tale. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank, the birds with draggled feathers, the animals with their fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the Lory, who had, at last, turned sulky, and would only say, "I am older than you, and must know better." And this Alice would not allow without knowing how old it was, and as the Lory positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last, the mouse, who seemed to be a person of authority among them, called out, "Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt sure she could catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. "Ahem," said the mouse, with an important air. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all around, if you please." "William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders, and had been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria—" "Ugh!" said the Lory with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, frowning, but very politely. "Did you speak?" "Not I," said the Lory hastily. "I thought you did," said the mouse. "I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found it advisable—" "Found what?" said the duck. "Found it," the mouse replied rather crossly. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means well enough, but only when I find a thing," said the duck. "It's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Elgar Hatheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans—" How are you getting on now, my dear? He continued, turning to Alice as it spoke. As wet as ever, said Alice in a melancholy tone. It doesn't seem to dry me at all. In that case, said the dodo solemnly, rising to its feet, I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies. Oh, speak English, said the eaglet. I don't know the meaning of half those long words, and what's more, I don't believe you do either. And the eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. What I was going to say, said the dodo in an offended tone, was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race. What is a caucus race? Said Alice. Not that she wanted much to know, but the dodo had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed inclined to say anything. Why, said the dodo, the best way to explain it is to do it. And as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day or spring day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it. First, it marked out a race course in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, go, but they began running when they liked, and left off when they liked, so that it was not so easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running a half hour or so, and were quite dry again, the dodo suddenly called out, The race is over! And they all crowded round it, panting and asking, Who has won? This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last, the dodo said, Everybody has won, and all must have prizes. But who is to give the prizes? Quite a chorus of voices asked. Why, she, of course, said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded round her, calling out in a confused way, Prizes! Prizes! Alice had no idea what to do, and in despair she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of confit. Luckily the salt water had not got into it, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one apiece, all around. But she must have a prize herself, you know, said the mouse. Of course, the dodo replied very gravely. What else have you got in your pocket? He went on, turning to Alice. Only a thimble, said Alice sadly. Hand it over, said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her at once, while the dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying, We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble. And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed, took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the confit. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in a ring, and begged the mouse to tell them something more. You promised to tell me your history, you know, said Alice, and, why, it is you hate C and D, she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again if she mentioned cats and dogs. "Mine is a long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale, certainly," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" And she kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this. Fury said to a mouse that he met in the house, "Let us both go to law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial. For really this morning I've nothing to do." Said the mouse to the cur, "Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge would be wasting our breath." "I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said the cunning old fury. "I'll try the whole case and condemn you to death." "You are not attending," said the mouse to Alice severely. "What are you thinking of?" "Oh, I beg your pardon," said Alice very humbly. "You had got to the fifth bend, I think." "I had not," said the mouse, sharply and very angrily. "A knot," said Alice, always ready to make herself useful, and looking anxiously about her. "Oh, do let me help to undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "Oh, I didn't mean it," pleaded poor Alice. "But you're so easily offended, you know." The mouse only growled in reply. "Oh, please come back and finish your story," Alice called after it, and the others all joined in chorus. "Yes, please do." But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. "What a pity it wouldn't stay," sighed the Lory, as soon as it was quite out of sight. And an old crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, "Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to you never to lose your temper." "Hold your tongue, Ma," said the young crab, quite snappishly. "You're enough to try the patience of an oyster." "I wish I had our Dinah here. I know I do," said Alice aloud, addressing nobody in particular. "She'd soon fetch it back." "And who is Dinah, if I might venture to ask the question?" said the Lory. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. "Dinah's our cat, and she's such a capital one of catching mice you can't think. And oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as look at it." This speech caused a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old magpie began wrapping itself up very carefully, remarking, "Oh, I really must be getting home. The night air, it doesn't suit my throat." And a canary called out in a trembling voice to its children, "Come away, dears. It's high time you were all in bed." On various pretexts, they all moved off, and Alice was soon left alone. "Oh, I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah," she said to herself in a melancholy tone. "Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more." And here poor Alice began to cry again, for she felt very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she again heard a little pattering of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed his mind and was coming back to finish his story. The end of chapter 3. I think we'll do, let's do one more chapter. We've got some time. Okay, chapter 4 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is The Rabbit Sends in a Little Bill. It was the White Rabbit, trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something. And she heard it muttering to itself, Oh, the Duchess! Oh, the Duchess! Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whiskers! She'll get me executed as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and she very good-naturedly began hunting about for them. But they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall, and the glass table, and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about, and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan, quick now." And Alice was so much frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. "It took me for its housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I really am. But I'd better take him his fan and gloves. That is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which the bright brass plate with the name was written W. Rabbit, engraved upon in bright red letters. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she should meet the real Mary Ann, and she turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, "to be getting messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah'll be sending me on messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk." "Coming in a minute, nurse, but I've got to see that the mouse doesn't get out." "Only, I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it began ordering people around like that." By this time she had found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she had hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of the gloves, and was just going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label this time with the words "Drink me," but, nevertheless, she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting is sure to happen," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow again, for surely I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." It did so, indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. Oh, I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on, growing and growing, and very soon she had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute there was not even enough room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down on one elbow against the door and the other arm curled round her head. Still she went on growing, and, as a last resource, she put one arm out of the door and one foot up the chimney, and she said to herself, "Now I can do no more whatever happens. What will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and, as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, it was no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't come down that rabbit hole at all. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened, and now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman. But then always to have lessons to learn? Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she answered herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books. And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation of it altogether. But after a few minutes she heard a voice outside, and stopped to listen. "Marianne, Marianne," said the voice, "fetch me my gloves this moment." Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it at all. Presently the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it. But as the door opened inwards, and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, "Well, I'll go and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible the rabbit had fallen into a cucumber frame or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat, Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she had never heard before. "Sure, then here I am, digging for apples, your honor." "Digging for apples indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come help me get out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now, tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, your honor." He pronounced it arm. "An arm? You goose! Whoever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure, it does, your honor, but it's an arm for all that." "Well, it's got no business there at any rate. Go and take it away." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, "Sure, I don't like it, your honor, at all, at all." "Do as I tell you, you coward." And at last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 little shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. "What a number of cucumber frames there must be," thought Alice. "I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer either." She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last came a rumble of little wheel carts, and the sound of a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the words, "Where's the other rabbit?" "Why, I didn't bring but one. Bill's got the other." "Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put him up in this corner." "No, tie 'em together first. They don't reach half high enough yet." "Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear?" "Mind that loose slate." Oh, it's coming down! Heads up below! A loud crash. Now who did that? Uh, it was Bill, I fancy. Who's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't, then. Bill's to go down. Here, Bill, the master says you're to go down the chimney. Oh, so Bill's to come down the chimney, has he? Said Alice to herself. Shy, they seem to put everything on Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure. But I think I can kick a little. She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could, and waited till she heard a little animal, she couldn't guess of what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney close above her. Saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what happened next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill!" And then the rabbit's voice going, "Catch him! You by the hedge!" Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold his head! Brandy now! Don't choke him! How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it!" Last came a little, feeble, squeaking voice. That's Bill, thought Alice. Well, I hardly know. Oh, no more, thank ye. I'm better now. I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I goes like a skyrocket. Oh, you did, old fellow, said the others. We must burn the house down, said the rabbit's voice. And Alice called out as loud as she could, If you do, I'll set dynamite at you. There was dead silence, instantly. And Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they'll do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off. After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, A barrowful will do, to begin with. A barrowful of what? Thought Alice. But she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and shouted out, You'd better not do that again, which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed, with some surprise, that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. If I eat one of those cakes, she thought, I'm sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't possibly make me bigger, it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes, and was delighted to find that she began to shrink directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out the house, and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs, who were giving it something out of some sort of bottle. They all made a rush at Alice at the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. The first thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself as she wandered about in the wood, is to grow to my right size again. And the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan. It sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it. And while she was peering about anxiously amongst the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, and feebly stretching out one paw, trying to touch her. "Poor little thing," said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle to it. But she was also terribly frightened at the same time at the thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would very likely eat her up, in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all its feet at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick, and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, and tumbled head over heels in its hurry to get hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game of play with a cart horse, and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran round the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way forwards each time, and a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the time, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth, and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a very good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, and till the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. "And yet what a dear puppy it was," said Alice, as she leant against a buttercup to rest herself and fanned herself with one of the leaves. "I should have liked to teach it tricks very much, if only I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've grown up again. I have to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other. But the great question is what?" The great question certainly was what. Alice looked all round her at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she did not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, but about the same height as herself, and when she looked under it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. And she stretched herself on her tiptoes and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large caterpillar that was sitting on top with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and taking not the smallest notice of her or of anything else. And that's the end of chapter 4 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And I think for this evening, that's probably enough storytelling. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the stories. Be sure to leave a comment in the comment section there below if you'd like me to say hello to anyone in the next few stories, or maybe a happy birthday to anyone. I'd love to do that. And with that, I hope you stay warm and stay safe and stay calm. Don't forget to breathe, and don't forget to join me tomorrow night from this little reading nook for the Aurora Bedtime Story Project. So I'll say, from my cozy little reading nook to yours, have a very good night.